What's up, John? How's it going?
Hello, Joe. How are you doing today?
Good, man. Good. Just in the middle of a bunch of stuff, trying to pump out some content, but I guess it's par for the course. How about yourself? How you doing?
Good, good. I'm switching gears from a podcast host to podcast guest all on the
Mm,
same day, which is pretty fun. We just recorded an episode this morning with Mark Freeman. I'm sure you've seen him around LinkedIn.
yeah, good friend of mine. Yeah, Mark's
Yeah,
awesome. So
yeah.
that's cool. Yeah, and it is interesting. I think kind of making that switch between host and guest, so or vice versa. So 'cause I always feel like because if you do podcasts, like you and I both do podcasts, and so what's funny about that is we um there's a tendency to even when you're a guest on somebody's podcast to treat it like you're the host too. At least I do that. 'Cause I'm really rude.
Yeah, Joe, tell us about yourself. Oh, wrong. Right, you're
no,
hosting. Okay, okay.
no need.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and that's exactly what happened because I was originally a guest on Mark Freeman's podcast slash newsletter, and I was the streaming guy, the streaming expert, and now I had him on my podcast as in him being a great data quality and just general data engineering
mhm.
expert. So it's fun to wear multiple hats.
It is. It is. And I guess for my audience, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself and also your podcast?
Yes, yes. My name is John Kutay. So I was one of the founding engineers at a company called Stream. It's unified data integration, data streaming, change data capture. Really goes back to my college coursework where I had a lot of interest in distributed systems, data visualization. So always fun to apply all that there. And I also run a podcast called What's New in Data, bringing on thought leaders such as yourself, Joe, and Matt Housley, and we've had Bruno Aziza, Mark Freeman. Recently interviewed Jamak Degani as well. Very exciting episode. A lot of
Nice.
I just love getting all the thought leaders and data engineering experts together, and everyone discussing their ideas, and we see how we all kind of converge on the same conclusions, but also have these little areas where people debate and items are 50-50, and it's just good to have all that discussion out in the open. So I feel like What's New in Data is a great channel for that, along with this podcast.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting too because yeah, the people you mentioned, they're all really good friends of mine, and it's interesting because and yourself included too, right? And one of the challenges is, um, as I guess quote thought leaders or whatever, is avoiding groupthink, right? And so, do we come to partial or whole conclusions because we're of sort of a hive mind, or is it because we're trying to be nice, or why do you think that is?
You know, I think there's when you have a lot of respect for people, it's you want to take what they say at face value, and they obviously have a lot of earned expertise and insights. And Joe, if you say something, unless I'm an expert in that field, like I'm gonna agree with you. I'm gonna take that as a learning for myself. But there are these times where I'll read blogs from someone who's very smart, but I've been in the weeds on that exact same topic, and I say, I don't know if that's actually going to work in every scenario, and that's kind of it's up to the reader to come up with their interpretation of whether it's correct or not. But I do think it comes back to the fact that we all have a lot of respect for each other, and the decades of work we all put in our respective fields.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's a situation where we've been contrarian or pushing back for the sake of it, but I can't think of it because I think that's a fun thought exercise to do, but you also might run the risk of coming across as highly annoying, and so just arguing for the sake of it. So yeah, it's interesting because it is discussions like this that do end up influencing, I would say, to some degree, the discussion that takes place in the broader industry, or for better or for worse. But that's increasingly how it is, and so
Yeah,
yeah,
when there's a buzzword thrown out there, it's kind of fun to just kind of pick a side and stick to it. I'm not gonna name any buzzwords right now because I'm sure some people wouldn't like the the thing that they coined to be labeled as a buzzword, but that can be a fun one. But you've had some of those on your other podcast, some of those debates, which have been fun.
Which ones come to mind for you? I'm curious.
Well, now I have to name it. The data contract one between Ethan Aaron and I believe it was Chad Sanderson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and Chad's written so much great stuff on data contracts. Actually, I was just talking to Mark Freeman about it today, and he gets really into the weeds. And I'm 100% in alignment with how he's framed data contracts. Ethan Aaron did a great job being kind of the playing devil's advocate and going in that direction.
It was almost like a pro wrestling match, I felt, because at the end of the day, I was expecting, we hyped it up as being this kind of a, boxing match or MMA match or whatever, and then it ends up being sort of a very civil discussion, and so I hope at some point we can have more of the Jerry Springer kind of format where we are, somebody's beating each other with a chair or something like that, and security. So actually, I probably. You wouldn't want Chad Sanderson in that one, though. I think he was a two-time junior gold medalist in Taekwondo for the Olympics. Yeah, so
well, good thing I agree with him. Then,
it's fine. Yeah. No, he's like the one of the nicest guys I know. But it is interesting though, the debates around a lot of these things. Whether it's contracts, data mesh, I think is a great example of that where. It's an idea that has been out for a few years now, and but it's still controversial for some people, right? Yes. I mean, I side with Shimak on that, and I hope it's I hope it comes into existence the way she describes it. I know that's what she's working on, but for every good idea out there, I just think it's natural to attract people who don't agree with you, and that's perfectly fine.
Look, and I've been on the other side of it because I work heavily in change data capture, and I work for people who have decades of experience there and really literally wrote the Oracle kernel, and with a now with a kind of a newer generation of data engineers, when they hear about a concept for the first time, they want to be skeptical, so they'll say things like, "Oh, change data capture, I heard that's an anti-pattern." And that's kind of like, to me, that's saying like, hey, 2 + 2, is it really 4? How do we know it's 4? And if you have these like logic discussions, you sometimes you have to prove things that you would otherwise think are obvious. So that is like one of the talk tracks where I do feel like I get passionate about it and heavily opinionated that change data capture is not an anti-pattern. I mean, we can take a step back and talk through like what change data capture is and how.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork. So, define what change data capture is and describe maybe kind of debate style. What's good and what's bad about it?
Yeah. So change data capture is a way of tracking changes in any sort of operational system that is processing transactions, or can be even simple as like a time series ledger from IoT streams. I think it's actually a very broad term. People think about it as database change data capture, where you have this write ahead log and you're going to the write ahead log to grab all the transactions out of it, and once you have those transactions, you can either replicate it or analyze it, whatever the use case is. Broadly, and I think Jay Krebs at Confluent put together a great blog about this, and I think it was around 2014, 2015, about how logs are these having an immutable record of just generally things that happened, right? And that can apply to IoT streams, that can apply to your software applications, like any event-driven architecture. So change data capture is just a way of capturing like things that happened, things that changed.
So, I mean, that sounds nice. So why do people say it's an anti-pattern? Like, why is that controversial?
So, and that's tied to the practice of doing database change data capture, replicating that data into, an OLAP system or a data warehouse where, applying changes, in real time can be expensive and challenging. How do you go about going from these raw logical change records, which are it's a pretty technical format into domain analytical data reports. And any data engineer who's doesn't know the history or the other challenges behind it, who's just trying to do it for the first time, will find that it's complicated. And when things are complicated, you're not sure if it's unnecessarily complex or if it's something that's where the juice is worth the squeeze. So and I've read topics about how teams can minimize this. Basically, your engineering teams are modeling data into these database tables and schemas, and now you have the analytics team that's doing CDC from those databases into the warehouse, and then the data has to be modeled again, which seems duplicative to some folks. And then we have these other to counter that. You have people writing about patterns like Outbox. Outbox is the idea that the engineering teams, you're not going to do CDC from the write-ahead logs to capture all the changes from that database. Instead, the engineering team is going to maintain this really nice table called the Outbox, which is going to track all the transactions for analytical purposes, and analytics team only has to worry about that. They don't have to worry about schemas changing and things along those lines, which sounds nice. If your engineering teams and your analytics teams are on huddles every day and making sure the Outbox is perfectly maintained as software changes under it. I work with a lot of Fortune 500 and even smaller companies that do change data capture in production for years. I just don't see how it's practical, especially when a lot of times change data capture is breaking down silos in organizations, right? Where, hey, a CIO or a chief data officer or a chief technology officer has this mandate to deliver analytics to their organization and a single view of the customer. You always hear about this magical customer 360 where across all your systems you see hey, the customer's here in Salesforce, they did this marketing activity, we captured that in HubSpot, they did something in our application that's in the database, they went on social media and tweeted about us, and we unify all that data in the warehouse, right? And these are so siloed systems. Now, when you think about that at enterprise scale, they might have thousands of different database instances running, right? So how are you going to tell every single one of those groups to maintain an Outbox? It's challenging. So that's why, CDC is such a nice layer of indirection that just says, just give me the copies of all the changes. I'm going to have all the data. And, when you're using like fully managed CDC products or streaming products, your engineering team has full control. I'm sorry, your data team has full control to deal with things like the schema changes or dead letter queues or adhering to data contracts. And this comes back to, what Chad Sanderson wrote when he was going into the technical deep dive of data contracts. And you can see it includes CDC, and it was going into a stream processor to enforce the contract. And that is, a correct implementation that I've seen, built at scale at these larger companies. So yeah, if you're small and your teams are nimble and you feel like you have a unique amount of collaboration between your engineering teams and your analytics teams, you can try to work around it with these patterns. But the proven method, which has been around for decades, is just doing change data capture.
Right. And so how does change data capture differ, or how is it similar to an event-driven system? Because I think this also trips people up a bit.
There's definitely overlap. Change data capture is inherently event-driven. So, when you talk about change data capture and look at it, what it really looks like, I mean, it's just a log of inserts, updates, deletes, DMLs, DDLs in your database, and it really you can think about it theoretically as a stream of events, and that's literally what it is. So event-driven architectures and software, I would say, is like the broader landscape, and change data capture I think is a very nice subset. Mm-hmm. Now, when you try to do change data capture without an event-driven system, then you run into more challenges. So I really do see CDC and event-driven architectures as something that should be very tied together.
Interesting. And I guess with respect to change data capture, like so if you're a data team doing change data capture, getting data from a change data capture system, like what are some best practices for those teams? And then I guess on after that, tell me what are some of the bad practices that you see. So
Yes, good practices definitely work backwards from the requirements of internal stakeholders. Get their their requirements, their data freshness SLAs, domain model, how they want to actually action this data. Start that earlier in the project because I
Mm.
see teams diving into the technical part too quickly and launching things without really having a plan there. But that we'll get to the bad practices later. So
Yeah.
good part, good practice definitely work backwards from the business problems of your stakeholders. Next thing is, have that communication with your DBAs. Make sure that you're able to tell them, hey, look, this is a secure solution. We're putting minimal overhead on the database because we're going against the logs. We're not running queries against it. You'll have to communicate that to them. DBAs, always very protective over databases. So, have all that material ready to go. You'll likely collaborate with DBAs to make sure that supplemental logging is enabled. If it's Postgres, you'll need logical replication. You'll need to collaborate on some other technical things like how often your logs roll over and make sure you have a strategy for when you have like a long running open transaction and the log rolls over, like what happens there. That's getting into the weeds a bit, but basically you want that communication with your DBAs to happen sooner rather than later, and at the same time work backwards from the needs of the business stakeholders because
Mm.
it matters whether they want data. Your business stakeholders want data within 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes. All those optimizations will come into play as you go into production, and you can even do that at a table level. So you can have high priority tables, you can have medium to low SLA tables. And this actually, I've seen this become extremely critical in a lot of environments where if the data engineers aren't thinking about this up front, there is a very high likelihood that they'll run into escalations where some teams are reporting lag, that they're not getting the transactions they're looking for, because you tried to kind of do this one size fits all method of, hey, we're just going to stream all the same transactions, all the
Mm.
transactions from all the tables at the same rate, which doesn't scale unless you're just throwing very expensive resources at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And some of the things I've seen too is like monitoring every single column in a database, and then that gets incredibly noisy in terms of understanding like what is actionable to look at in terms of changes versus what may or may not matter, but it's adding a lot of transactional overhead to the change data capture process. Do you see stuff like that too, where maybe the view is maybe a bit too granular on some tables, or
Yeah, it's super important to have a strategy around how you're going to handle DDLs
Mhm.
because on one hand, you want to keep the pipelines online, but at the same time, you don't want to build up a ton of transactions that are violating your target systems and reports and breaking that. So, how are you going to backfill the events? How are you going to queue them up so that once you apply the DDLs on both sides and everything is consistent, that you can, automatically just kind of restart with minimal data loss? Because one thing in CDC is time is critical because if the pipeline's down or corrupt for a certain amount of time, those write ahead logs will roll over at some point and you'll lose all your open transactions and things along those lines. And you'll have to do a resync, and a resync is always annoying. I mean, it's just time consuming and complex to to start that process over again.
Explain resync for the audience out there.
Sure. So essentially, CDC, you have events coming in from your database. You're streaming that into your data warehouse. That's all a streaming online system. Now, let's say the database goes down or the consumer goes down for some amount of time, and you're backfilling these events. Now, let's say that you weren't able to fix the pipeline while the queues were in order, and now you have to resync. Resync basically means, hey, I have to go look up all the transactions and from all those tables from the time that our pipeline was down, do a batch load of them, and then start CDC again from the last record that was part of that batch resync. So that just requires a bit of a control process, and it's it requires a bit of work. So you want to avoid it. You want to be in a situation where, okay, we just pause the pipeline, we fix everything on our end and start it again, and it should work naturally. I don't have to do a resync, because every time you have that coordination between the batch load and the CDC, there's opportunities for dropped records. And even the products that say like, hey, we automate all that stuff for you, make it super easy. I mean, that you always have to validate that, right? Because those automated processes are the most prone to data getting lost. So then you have to think about how you're going to do like compare and repair between like your source tables or your target tables. It's really something that when you're dealing with transactions, something that vital and critical, you want to make sure that all that stuff is tested and truly validated.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on zero ETL? There's a movement right now of some vendors coupling the transactional systems directly to the analytical systems. By systems, I'm talking databases and data warehouses and so forth. Does this? I'm curious about your thoughts on this.
So in the simple cases, I think zero ETL is fine if you can validate that it works for your teams. Like, hey, if I'm just copying data from Salesforce objects to my warehouse, then it sounds like zero ETL would work fine. And I think in theory, it's, if everything works, then zero ETL, is cool. I like the concept of, not having too many tools, not minimizing overhead as much as possible. I think it remains to be seen, can that be applied at mass scale for all types of sources that need to be loaded, and then where do you go from how do you go from that raw like object that you're sourcing from into the end state, which is like your prod tables, your reports, etc. It's going to require transformation somewhere in the process. So it's not going to be zero ETL. It's going to be like, hey, maybe the ETL is shifting to the right a bit more. So the work has to be done somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's like a push or a pull transform and load or something. It's because you're not necessarily extracting per se. The data's more being pushed into a system. Yeah, it's an interesting marketing twist, I would say that some vendors are going through. But it is interesting because I do see certain cloud vendors and cloud data platforms are now talking about kind of this unification, and it's definitely brings to mind what does a change data capture look like in that scenario, and we'll see.
Yeah, and in environments where, everything is relatively connected, let's say, hey, I'm in, all my data is already in Amazon, and I believe AWS was pushing this pretty heavily, like for Aurora and Redshift, right?
Yeah.
And you can kind of just copy, they can do the work of copying table to table because they're already managing everything, right? Like it's a fully managed database, fully managed data warehouse, easy. We can just, copy that data over in their backend. Right, but that's rarely the problem statement that data teams have in front of them, especially with like multi-cloud or different data centers or different applications. You have security overhead that you have to consider. So yeah, in the simple case, let's go for zero ETL. It'll be great. Yep. Now in like real world scenarios where you have corner cases, I haven't seen zero ETL, gain much adoption in the types of, use cases that, I work on and solve
Right.
for our types of customers, because it's typically a bit more complex than that. And even in, we run our own internal data stack here at Stream, and, zero ETL wouldn't really apply there because, we're multi-cloud, right? We have microservices running in every single cloud, different regions. We have all these different applications we're sourcing from. I've yet to see something that's like, oh, zero ETL, everything's just working magically. I would use it. I would love that, but it's not there for me right now. It's not at my fingertips, so it's hard for me to say if it's a real thing yet.
Yeah, well, time will tell, I guess, right? Because I think there's a lot of ingredients that need to happen in order for this to get adoption, right? Like in AWS, it assumes that you're using Aurora and Redshift, and I think your data is amenable to this kind of a situation. So, like I said, we'll see. I mean, the other big trend that I see right now, at least big trends that are talked about, is data sharing. You have thoughts on data sharing and how CDC impacts that, or that impacts CDC, vice versa?
Yeah, I still, you're always going to need that layer of indirection for where the operational data is being tracked, whether it's that transactional database or something like Salesforce or an SAP. And that needs to go into your, some analytics platform to enable data sharing because, hey, I can't do data sharing and go against like my operational system and add additional load there because I've
Right.
your engineering teams have already, procured their compute and disk resources based on what their application needs, not some, third party data sharing client going to come in and run queries out of nowhere. So, in that context, it wouldn't work. But let's say that, yeah, all my data is in the warehouse and there's these cool data sharing plugs that work magically in the back end. And, they can just, some third party can go in and, to them, it feels like they're just looking up something in my Salesforce, but they're really doing like a query against like my warehouse. Now, my question is how do you handle issues around kind of hot resources, right? Because when you're running queries, there's compute that needs to run. That compute's not free, right? So, how do you go about provisioning that infrastructure? How do you make sure that data sharing is able to handle peaks of requests coming
Right.
from different places? I mean, it just seems like at the end of the day, we're still querying tables, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts there too.
I think it's something I'm starting to hear more and more about. I think both from practitioners as well as obviously vendors. Certain vendors are pushing data sharing for very obvious reasons. And I mean, I think it's something that's going to get adopted, but I think it's particular data sets that have been highly curated and lend themselves really well to sharing in that way. It also, and I'll get to this in a second too with the question, but it's I've also seen some companies say that they were doing like data mesh, and it was basically through stuff like Snowflake data sharing, for example, and so forth. And so maybe that is a way of I guess sharing data in a I wouldn't call it a decentralized way as Zhamak would put it, but it is sharing in a way. So, but yeah,
Yeah. I mean, if it's a nice UX abstraction on top of role based access control or something like that, then I definitely see value in it. I think when it's framed as like, hey, you don't need to move data around. It's anyone can just go access it. You're gonna need to move data around. Is still my point.
yeah, exactly. I think again, I think it also lends itself really well to situations where there's regulatory or compliance issues, especially if you're in Europe, for example, and you're face
Yeah.
the wrath of the EU if you host data. Then definitely just getting a data set from somebody that you just have view access to. I would take that any day of the week, but of course it depends on what you're going to do with it, right? So there's yeah, I mean there's always trade-offs, right? I feel like this is it's sort of like zero ETL. I think data sharing remains to be seen, like sort of the power of it, but I think it's cool that it's there if you need it. So
Yeah.
not gonna say it's like a totally horrible idea. Like I think the thing is, like in our industry, ideas surface because there's a problem, right? I mean, it's not like this is an industry full of idiots. Like I'd say overwhelmingly, the data and tech industry is full of really smart people, and new solutions arise because of the problems that people have had. And so,
Yeah.
whether those are good or bad, I try not to have an opinion really. I just think that it's like somebody was affected by this. They came up with a solution, so therefore they thought it was a good idea. I don't know. So it
Yeah.
worked for them.
There's definitely going to be pockets of problems where data sharing is going to be a really nice piece of innovation, and
Yeah.
like you said, if someone thought about it, it's obviously solving some problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of interesting stuff coming out these days, and even you mentioned data mesh,
Yeah.
and data mesh does have a lot of uh, influence on how companies are thinking about structuring and organizing access to data internally, and having that, federation piece sorted out. And, maybe data sharing, like you said, it's centralized through certain vendors, and, it still requires like one data platform in that context, which doesn't really meet the decentralization pillar of
Hmm.
data mesh. But as long as there's ways to make sure data is accessible both internally and to any, trusted third parties that need access to the data, I think things like data sharing will be of value.
Yeah, yeah. What are your thoughts on data mesh?
Yes, I think it's a overall very powerful concept. If I always recommend people read the book by
Yeah.
Jamak Degani. It's called Data Mesh. You can't miss it if you Google it or look it up on Amazon. And and I was recently speaking to Bruno Aziza, who's head of data and analytics at Google Cloud, on my podcast about it. And he's also a big believer in data mesh, and we were both talking about the power of it. But he also mentioned that it's kind of disappointing how it's been a little bit vendor washed, and it's
Yeah.
created a lot of misinterpretations that have been broadcast through, heavy social media marketing from vendors, and it's created confusion, which has created some very unwarranted criticism of data mesh, where they're not even criticizing what data mesh actually is. If you read the book, and to I'm not going to get into the depths of data mesh, but it gives you a set of core principles for data in your organization that are very powerful. And I've seen teams implement this at the largest companies, and it really does scale. Like that's one of the powerful things about it. So if you and I was talking about working backwards from business problems and scoping your technical requirements based on that. And if you follow the data mesh principles, I mean, that's just going to be part of your day to day, regardless. And a lot of these large company data team executives, when they start reading the book and start understanding the principles, it becomes a great tool for them. And not to say it's a technical tool, but just like a way of abstracting data internally. So yes, very powerful, but at the same time, you have to make sure that you're getting the knowledge of data mesh from a trusted source.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so the book too is Data Mesh. It's out of O'Reilly and it's by Zhamak Dehghani. Because I think there's other books on data mesh that are out there if you Google it. That it might be some ebook or something. So if you have to sign up for the ebook, if it's not from at least Starburst website, who I think may still be sponsoring her book, then and I would be suspect of it. She's the only person I'll listen to about data mesh, plain and simple, because well, it's her idea. She thought of it, and so but it is crazy like how much that idea is taken on sort of a life of its own. It's nuts. And to your point too, I saw that on LinkedIn the other day where it's like kind of uh, what'd you call it? Data mesh washing or something?
Yeah, vendor washing.
Vendor
Yeah.
washing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my God, I don't think I've seen anything quite like that in a long, long time. And I actually introduced her to Bill Inman, because when he came up with the data warehouse, it was a very similar reaction. I think the industry took the data warehouse, and I think according to him, sort of took off into left field with it, and he's kind of like, that's not quite what I intended, but okay. And so I made an intro with with Bill and her, and like, you guys need to talk, because I think Zhamak definitely has something very similar happening, where me and her kind of joke, she's like Brian in that movie Life of Brian, where it's like for better or for worse, it's how it is. But I'm rooting for her. I hope that the idea really succeeds according to how she's laid it out and envisioned it. So
Yeah, and she was another recent guest on What's New in Data on an upcoming episode, and just wow, just the depth of knowledge and experience she has is just second to none. It was just a really incredible conversation. So I always look for opportunities to mention her book, even to the data leaders that I work with, via Stream. I'm not saying Stream is a data mesh, but I always recommend they read those principles, because it does help them execute with their data projects. And ultimately, if everyone you're working with is successful, then you're going to be successful. So
Yeah.
I always recommend people, stay on top of those, those thought frameworks that, make them as productive as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of switching gears a bit, you mentioned Stream, and I just want to get your take on this. The tooling landscape right now for change data capture for data pipelining tools is very, very crowded. How do you? I mean, Stream's been around for a while, right? And it's not a new company. How in a very saturated market, like how do you stay on top of things? How do you stay ahead of competitors?
Yeah, we're very customer obsessed. I mean, if you ask me who my boss is, it's the customers. And working with leaders at these companies, really understanding their initiatives, what their pain points are, and iterating on our product to make sure that it's helping them be successful and hit those internal metrics and KPIs that they have. And it's the market's changed a lot. I mean, Stream's about 10 years old now.
Yeah.
And we've seen this, and it's always been a modern distributed platform. That's, we basically, the company came out of a spun out of Golden Gate Software, which is the number one change data capture product. Yep. Before it was acquired by Oracle, and it still is Golden Gate's still very popular. And this came out of feedback that our CEO and CTO had with their previous customers, and hey, we need a distributed, scalable CDC platform that's going to help us with next generation analytics initiatives. Now, this is back in 2011, 2012, around the same time Snowflake was coming together, and we've seen it progress from the Hadoop days to the now everything's like modern data stack, and now everything's shifting even more, not shifting, but let's say another iteration is becoming AI and ML, and there's all these trends and hype and things coming out, but we've always just been very obsessed with what our customers are doing. And I get opportunities to work with great chief data officers, CIOs, VP of engineering. You listen to them when they talk about what they're looking to solve. I don't listen to market makers or look at vendor landscapes or things like that. I mean, if you ask the vendor landscape people, I mean, Stream's not even part of the modern data stack. You can go into BigQuery and see Stream right there in the Add Data button, or Snowflake Partner Connect. But but when it comes to people who are talking about too much hype driven things, I try to be skeptical about that.
Yeah, having been through a few of the kind of the Magic Quadrant exercises myself, there's a bit more to it. I'll leave it at that. So
yeah, and I think that even for data leaders, it's great to network with other data leaders and follow thought leadership series like Joe, this podcast, and when we put things
and your
together.
podcast.
Yeah, and that's really where the truth lies, because these data leaders will go in and they're trying to solve real internal problems, and they're working with budget constraints, and they're working with real world friction points, which is like having to collaborate with other engineering teams, siloed data sources, and ultimately what works for them is likely going to work for you, but you have to try it out. But if you're just paying attention to marketing and hype, it's tough to be successful, because that's constantly changing.
Yeah, and as we all know, data is super gnarly too. I mean, the guests on my podcast, I tend to try and get people who are either practitioners, and these are people you probably never heard of, right? But they're hardcore practitioners that I really do respect from a just boots in the ground perspective. But you're absolutely right, because it's all these, like you mentioned corner cases before, right? It's always the corner cases that come to get you. It's not the pedestrian stuff that's been solved by a million different companies, right?
Yes.
So that's the hard part.
Absolutely. It's and you always find those corner cases, and I always feel like teams that try to make it sound like data is just a cookie cutter process, and you throw one tool at it and it's going to solve all your problems. I mean, that's always an oversimplification and sort of fool's gold to some extent, because you're going to run into situations where you have to build something custom internally. It's not going to work as like this click and drag like experience that's going to be like super easy all the time. So how do you, I mean, at the end of the day, data engineers are distributed systems engineers, and they might not go into that field with that assumption, but it's true that you have to think about all these internal corner cases, and what if this cloud availability zone goes down? Hey, we're working with like a replicated Postgres. What if the master goes down and we only have the read replica? And like all these situations are very real, and data teams have to figure out how to work through that.
Which is a big challenge because, especially in the age of SaaS-based software, right? It's super easy to bolt things on together. Kind of daisy chain, a bunch of SaaS services, which is great, but it still pays to understand what goes on under the hood, because things do happen, even with major providers. Like things happen, and then what's your fail-safe if that happens, or what's the SLA from that vendor if things happen, right?
Yeah.
You do need to know this stuff. So
yeah,
but and that's sort of too where maybe some of the misconceptions start coming into play, like of change data capture and others that we talked about earlier. Because there's I would say it's because there's a lot more abstraction, and because things are hidden behind basically a paywall and a UI, it's a lot easier for vendors to make claims about certain things because everything's obfuscated, and engineers aren't as close to the quote metal as they used to be. So
yep.
That's my opinion, at least.
And look, it's much simpler than what we had 10 years ago for sure. And I've worked with large companies that had to deal with the previous iteration of data, which is like kind of Hadoop, Samza, and like all these on-premise tools I would run as like open source, where you had to build a lot of it yourself, and it was really hard to get those use cases to production. Whereas with fully managed services like what you have in the major CSPs and Snowflake and Google Cloud, AWS, etc., it's so much easier. But there's still quite a bit of work to do.
Mm-hmm. Quite a bit of work. Kind of switching gears a bit. So you're also a musician.
I am.
Nice.
Yes. So, and people bring that up, and it's sort of like an alter identity of mine. So I don't make music under my name anymore. But it's a bit of a passion project.
That's cool. That's really cool. I think that's one thing I think we noticed about each other. I'm not sure how, but well, it's been easier if you look at my studio, because it's always in a podcast and stuff. But
yeah, I mean, you have the whole synthwave set up behind you, so it was and you're a DJ, as we can see your turntables as well.
Yeah, and sorry for the audience, this is probably audio only, but if you watched any of my podcasts before, then the video ones, at least you've seen the studio. So yeah, it's interesting. But that is interesting though. Like, how does how do you achieve this sort of duality though, right? Of like art and still being a data nerd. So
yeah, they go very hand in hand. So I basically in my free time on my weekends, I really enjoy when I have like a song coming into my head and just like inspired, just flesh it out, make it a full thing. And I was doing that, and I feel like, man, I feel like I could be doing more. So like it's just one of those things that just snowballed very naturally. And actually the biggest release I ever had was this year. I did a song called Smile with another artist. Her name's Jade Lynn, and I mean, I think last time I checked, it's like almost at like 100,000 streams now, and like Chill Nation picked it up. And wow. I wish I was just like touring and doing all that cool stuff. But at the same time, I love data. I love tech. I love doing all being a builder and creator. So I think it all comes down to just when you're inspired to do something, do you have the ability and the desire to really see it through all the way to the end into a great finished product that other people can enjoy. So,
Yeah, exactly. I'm much the same way. I always thought it'd be kind of interesting because I do a lot of speaking. If I, if there was a way to bridge like speaking conferences and then DJ gigs.
Let's
So
make it happen. Let's make it happen.
yeah, exactly. Because need something to do at night. And sleep's probably not one of them. So,
Yeah,
but
cancel sleep and you'll have so much more time on your hands. So, um, yeah, Joe, next event we do, you're definitely going to be on the DJ ticket.
I have to bring my
Um,
USB stick out then.
exactly.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things. I actually pack my DJ, my headphones and USB stick wherever I go, just in case there's decks. Sometimes there are, but usually not. So they usually
Yeah.
don't appear at hotels for some reason. I don't know why, but
What kind of music do you DJ?
that's a good question. There's the music I DJ and the music I listen to, right? And these aren't the same things. And so the music I DJ has historically been like house, kind of rare disco kind of stuff. And I've been playing that whole vibe for,
Oh, nice.
gosh, over 23, 24 years now. At the same time, there's the other part of me that loves like old school techno and new school tech, but like real techno, not some EDM crap, but like techno. And I almost want to have a different DJ persona for that, sort of what Green Velvet does, where he has like his alter ego that plays house, and then Green Velvet's more techno. But so I like that a lot. The stuff I play on my synths and whatnot tends to be a lot more techno based.
Nice.
So yeah, it just depends what mood I'm in. So
And I think that's one of the cool things about DJing is, you're a curator of your taste, right?
mhm.
So, and everyone has their own unique taste in terms of like music, and like you said, you like the older school techno and some of the synth stuff and disco, and being able to just like put that into a collective playlist and mix it and do play it for a crowd. It's just super fun. I mean, that's why I'm always fascinated by the whole DJ space. So and,
Yeah.
and in a way, you, Joe, are a curator of thoughts and opinions and talk tracks and data as well. So these things go hand in hand for sure.
Well, they do. I mean, I think the experience I had of being a DJ for a long time, and promoting club nights and stuff actually goes hand in hand with the stuff I'm doing now. I don't see any direct difference in terms of methodology, right? Maybe that's why it's worked to some extent, right? Because you're not taking the traditional marketing approach. You're taking a very different way of doing things, but it works. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Well, cool, man. I think we're coming up on time here. Great chat. Hope to see you, very very soon at one of the big June events. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
awesome, awesome.
I think we're close to finalizing that. That hopefully we'll cross paths in San Francisco.
That'd be a lot of fun. So,
Yes.
awesome, man. So John, for people who want to learn more about you, how can they do that?
A few places. You can go to my LinkedIn. It's just linkedin.com/in/John Kutay, just my name. Also, my Twitter, same thing, just John Kutay. I'm also on Blue Sky now as
Oh,
JKXO. And if you want to follow my music, this is the first time I'm announcing it to the data crowd. Actually, is you can actually follow my music. I'm JKXO on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, etc. So yeah, that's always been a bit of an alter ego for me, but I guess I'll share it now since you asked.
as well. I
Yeah.
mean, you have a huge hit, and uh, we'll make it bigger. That's awesome. So yeah, we'll chat soon. Thanks for being on, dude. So
Always great catching up with you, Joe, and hope we cross paths very soon.
yeah, definitely.
Talk soon.